Jil Sander does not control Jil Sander. Helmut does not control Helmut. Margiela does not control Margiela, and Tom Ford no longer owns Tom Ford. Which raises a very severe question. Why did 4 of fashion's most influential designers willingly give away the one thing they spent their entire careers building, their name?
Helmut is one of the most influential designers in the world today, and he's decided to keep his Paris show extremely exclusive. Only 150 people are being allowed inside. We're among the lucky ones.
It was way ahead of its time. The show, the format, the clothes.
Margiela has been the last revolution we had in fashion.
I will sell this house today.
To understand why designers sell their companies and therefore their names, Jil Sander is one of the first that comes to mind. She was one of the first, it was one of the most emblematic ones, and one of the dirtiest ones. Jil Sander gave up her name in 1989. And her case is not only exciting because it's dramatic, because it is dramatic, but because also we see a lot of contradictions that designers have to deal with today. And also why things like this are not really happening anymore. Hello, welcome back to my huge channel, everybody. This is tubavalon, and on this channel we're analyzing fashion design and theories. If you haven't yet subscribed, which you obviously have not done because otherwise you would have committed a crime against humanity, you're probably subscribed. You can also join the Patreon where I have tons of videos. You have access to the Discord server where there are global fashion enthusiasts all over the world. And I think I can objectively say it's the best place in the fashion universe. I'm sorry, I might be biased. Of course I'm not biased. And I also just said I think objectively, which makes me look like I'm using the rhetorical language of a pope in 1325. Unlike many other designers in the 20th century in Paris, Jil Sander was not French. She was born in 1943 in Wesselburen, a town in northern Germany, which during that era, I had to Google that, had less than 2,000 people living there. After school, she studied textile engineering in Krefeld, which is one of Germany's historic textile centers. She didn't really focus on classical garment making and fashion design, but was a lot more interested in textile engineering and actually producing textiles. Informative side fact here as well to see how incredibly talented Austrian and German textile engineers were apparently in the 20th century, considering Maria Messner, who I interviewed, and you can see the interview on Patreon, is also the Acte 3 founder who is today creating the weaving tweeds of Chanel. In any case, we can say that textile engineering will visibly always stay a strong signature in the aesthetic of Jil Sander. During the 1960s, she spends a period studying in California at UCLA before returning to Germany and working as a fashion editor for the women's magazine Petra. I guess this experience also helped her to see fashion from a broader perspective, not only from the production side, but also on how to write about it, how to sell it. And in 1968, she already opened her first boutique in Hamburg, which is not an easy thing to do if you do not like the aesthetic of the 70s. And she did not like that. I don't think I need to explain here what the 70s looked like fashion-wise, but we know that youth culture was on the rise and the ready-to-wear departments were challenging the dominance of traditional couture houses. And designers like Yves Saint Laurent were actually redefining how luxury was being perceived from the new generation. And of course, the Jil Sander aesthetic was already in the 70s far away from anything theatrical. It was actually pretty extreme when it came to restraint. This approach also kind of led to her being an outsider. And when she presented collections in Paris during the 70s, a lot of critics considered the work too strict and too controlled. I think in retrospect, we can all say it was pretty good that she stuck to her vision. And it's also another proof that you should always trust yourself when you want to do something innovative. Because suddenly, towards the end of the 80s and especially in the 90s, the consumers were suddenly responding to a quieter form of luxury. Together with designers such as Helmut, Miuccia Prada, Donna Karan, Calvin Klein, Jil Sander helped define what would later become known as probably luxury minimalism. And by the time she went public in 1989, she had already managed to turn her tiny boutique in Hamburg into one of the most influential European fashion brands. And 10 years later, she decided to sell it. And we're getting to this. In 1989, she took the company public on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange, selling about 1/3 of the business for around $56 million, while retaining control through special voting rights. The move mainly provided capital to expand in North America and Asia, and which transformed her also into turning to one of the very first designer-led companies being listed in a stock exchange. What's important here to know is that Jil Sander didn't try to cash out and fill her pockets and by getting listed in the stock exchange or anything. It was not about making money immediately. It was really about growing the company. She still had strategic control, and it was just about getting larger, better, and more international. But 10 years later, in 1999, she would make a very different decision. The company was profitable, internationally recognized, and publicly listed already. She had everything she wanted. And she had built a strong ready-to-wear business. It was established in distinctive visual identity and turned a small Hamburg boutique into one of the most respected fashion houses. She even launched perfume, which surprisingly for everyone turned into the #1 bestseller, the first time ever coming from a small designer-led brand. But here again, context is important. The fashion space was changing dramatically towards the end of the 90s, because suddenly there was something popping up called luxury conglomerates. LVMH had established itself as the dominant force in luxury. The group controlled Louis Vuitton, Dior, Givenchy, Celine, Kenzo and Loewe, and many more. And the strategy was mainly to acquire old heritage houses and use their infrastructure to scale them globally. And at the same time, what would later be called Kering, another portfolio was being built. Back then operating under the name Gucci Group, it acquired Yves Saint Laurent, Balenciaga, Alexander McQueen, Bottega Veneta and Stella McCartney. I think it's really interesting to see how the conglomerates also have a certain type of aesthetic when it comes to their portfolio. These designers are not a coincidence. It doesn't happen that just this deal happens and they end up in the portfolio of LVMH or Kering. Kering and LVMH too have different personalities. Yves Saint Laurent, for example, brought one of fashion's most important fashion names. Balenciaga contributed for credibility among industry insiders. I would say it was the underdog brand with Nicolas Ghesquière. Alexander McQueen represented the creative experimentation that we still know today. And Bottega Veneta offered exceptional craftsmanship. All these characteristics are still existent for these brands. But Prada, and you're going to understand why this is important very soon, had a completely different strategy. Rather than focusing on craft or heritage or let's say traditional concepts, Prada had an incredibly strong focus on contemporary design, which meant acquiring Jil Sander, Helmut and even Azzedine Alaïa. So knowing that Jil Sander, the brand, was already doing amazing in the 90s, she was listed in the stock exchange, she was launching perfume, the ready-to-wear was finally on trend. Everybody wanted to be a Caroline Bessette back then. And it happens that in 1999, Jil Sander sells the company to the Prada group, which might sound weird because you might think Jil Sander was doing amazing. Finally, her aesthetic was on trend. Everybody wanted to have the cool New York, or let's say European, I think it's still a very New York driven aesthetic as well when it comes to the minimalism. Everybody wanted to dress this way. She was listed in the stock exchange. She was expanding. Everything was working amazing. Prada acquired a really well working company back then. And it also acquired the name Jil Sander. And just to make these two strategic moments in the history of Jil Sander very clear again, the Jil Sander IPO in 1989 is there for a capital raise while she still maintains the full control, whereas the 1999 Prada acquisition is a sales of control in exchange for growth. And of course, Jil Sander did not sell her name in a literal sense. She sold the shares in a company that owned the intellectual property associated with the brand. Legally, these are very different things, but they kind of result to the same thing. The trademark, which is in this case the personal name, stays with the company that owns it, of course, and the founder loses control over that trademark. That means they lose control over their personal name. And I think the Jil Sander case is really a great example of how you can kind of unwillingly lose control over your own name. Because if the business growth is your only goal, which is probably the goal of every single designer and company owner in the world, you also turn yourself into a commercial asset. I'm not a lawyer, but I assume if you turn your name into something that can get licensed, you also turn your name into something like an asset that can get acquired and eventually can get controlled by other people. And this did not only happen to Jil Sander. This also happened to Helmut Lang. This also kind of happened to Margiela and also to Tom Ford, even though it is a completely different case in the Tom Ford case, which is also pretty interesting. The fact that he was already in a different designer generation in the 90s and the fact that he grew up and turned into Tom Ford within a luxury conglomerate already gave him a different perspective of how the business works. Because while Jil Sander and Helmut Lang and Margiela were trying to build their own namesake brands, their own design-driven personal brands, Tom Ford was already at Gucci. He was already in this luxury. It was not a luxury conglomerate yet. Actually, Tom Ford's success and Gucci's success led to now Kering turning into a luxury conglomerate. As a creative director of Gucci alongside Domenico De Sole, he participated directly in the transformation of the Gucci group into one of the industry's most powerful acquisition machines. In 1999, when Jil Sander decided to sell to Prada, the fight was just starting between the conglomerates. They were actually not yet aware that they're luxury conglomerates. For example, the biggest competitor of LVMH, which is the now Kering, was back then called PPR, Pinot Printemps Redoute, a conglomerate that had its name from a department store and a mail ordering catalog business. And after acquiring Gucci in 1999, PPR started being called the Gucci Group because Gucci was not the full parent company, but the strongest brand in there, and was actually also a company name, so it was being called Gucci Group. But after PPR sold Printemps in 2006, they renamed themselves in 2013 with Kering. So Tom Ford had the best expertise from all of them, starting with Gucci, in what you can do with a name in luxury. It actually led to the vice versa, that after his work as a designer for a different brand, he decided to open a namesake brand. But unlike many founder or creative designer-led houses of the previous generations, Tom Ford was actually pretty early already aware how to structure a modern luxury business. There were licensing processes, beauty, eyewear, everything that brings in pretty quickly money. This was a growth-driven project. It was maybe a passion project, but it was a very systematic one. Estée Lauder then acquires the Tom Ford brand, that means beauty plus fashion, in 2022 for $2.8 billion. This was a different kind of transaction compared to the ones that were before with designers leaving their own namesake brand. This was, as I said, a very strategic exit. And I think that's why we see that personality is so important, and the connection to your personal name, in my opinion, as well. Because you see how every creative director handles this exit process so differently. For example, Helmut Lang's departure was also very different. After Prada gradually kind of acquired the company between 1999 and 2004, Lang became increasingly distant from an industry that was growing faster and faster and was getting more corporate and more commercially driven. In 2005, he decides to leave completely and turn himself towards making art. And this was probably one of the harshest exits or departures for a creative director leaving his namesake brand. In terms of Margiela, it felt painful as well. I don't know if you know the story about it, but in my opinion, it's one of the most emotional ones. In 2002, the OTB group purchases a majority stake of Maison Martin Margiela, but he stays for a few years. He stays for until 2009 and then leaves anonymously from one day to the other. And it's pretty emblematic of how a designer probably dies inside and just decides to leave. And if you watch the documentary about Martin Margiela, in my own words, you also hear how painful still the departure for him was. It was not just like, hey, I'm going to leave everybody there. So it was a really emotional exit, and it was probably the decision of a designer who didn't connect with what he created himself, and he still tried to save it somehow. He still stayed there for several years. Jil Sander was a bit more chaotic. She came back 2 or 3 times to Prada, every time trying to save it. That's why Helmut Lang's exit is kind of the craziest, because he just leaves and never comes back. And in terms of Tom Ford, it's actually a success story because he just uses his Gucci awareness that he created himself. So it's not that he benefited, he made it such a big thing that he started to create his own brand out of it. And all these changes in the life cycles of creative directors, in the decision making of trying to raise capital, usually to gain growth, which we all do sometimes. We all want to gain capital in some form, and we might sell ourselves for it. It might happen, but it also shows us actually something very contemporary and also how the industry has shifted today, because we don't have these stories anymore. Did you realize the last time a designer-led brand was sold to a conglomerate? Do you remember that? If Chanel wants a new creative direction, they decide to hire Mathieu Blazy. Kering decides to have a new identity for Balenciaga and they decide to go for Pierpaolo Piccioli. Something has shifted in the influence of designers as well. The industry and the conglomerates are so big and have so big portfolios that they don't need to purchase new brands, new designer-led brands. They actually just want the talent and then they just put them in the brands existing. In some sort, we can say that Jil Sander, Helmut, Margiela, Tom Ford are probably the last generation of designers that have made it with their company, because big conglomerates are not investing in smaller brands anymore. The brands they have are already so big that they just need the fresh new talent that sits there as a creative director. You don't need to invest and trust a new small designer with their company. You don't want that anymore. All the creative directors we know today are running multi-billion-dollar businesses, but nobody owns anything anymore. Nobody owns anything anymore. Everybody's goal is to get pitched to a big fashion house at some point. So this is the story of losing your name, and this is not a positive outlook on fashion. I'm sorry. I really loved reading into this. I hope you enjoyed this topic. It was not about fashion design, but it's also about political things maybe a bit. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel, because half of you don't do that, I think. What are you even doing? And join the Patreon if you want to connect with people, talk about things, read and see the last videos. You can share anything you think about. Weird fashion thoughts are accepted. Weird fashion looks are accepted. Everything that's weird, we appreciate and we nourish that. We want that. We really want that. See you to the next one. Bye.